Hello guys, and I'll make here, and today we're going to be reading chapter 5 of Emily Windsnap. The Tale of Emily Windsnap, chapter 5. I waved to my mom as I made my way down the pier. Bye-bye, darling. Have a lovely day, she called. Go back in, I thought. Bye! I smiled back at her. I walked woodenly along the pier, glancing behind me every few seconds. She was smiling and waving every time I looked. Eventually, she went inside and closed the side door behind her. I continued up the top of the pier and checked behind me one last time, just to be sure. Then, instead of turning onto the boardwalk, I ran down the steps onto the beach and snuck under the pier. I pulled off my jeans and shoes and shoved them under a rock. I already had my suit on underneath. I'd never done this in the daytime before. It felt kind of weird. The tide was in, so I only had to creep a short way under the pier. A few people were milling around on the beach, but no one looked my way. What if they did? For a second, I pictured them all pointing at me. Fish girl, laughing, chasing me with a net. I couldn't do it. But Shona, in mermaid school, I had to do it. I'd swim underwater all the way to Rainbow Rocks. No one would ever see my tail. Before I could change my mind, I ran into the freezing cold water. One last look around me, then I took a breath and dove, and was on my way. I made my way to Rainbow Rocks and hung around at the edge of the water, keeping hidden from the shore. A minute later, Shona arrived. You're here, she grinned, and we dipped under. She took me in a new direction out across Shiprock Bay. When she came to the farthest tip of the bay, Shona turned to me. Are you ready for this? She asked. Are you joking? I can't wait. She flipped herself over and started swimming downward. I copied her moves, scaling the rocks as we swam deeper and deeper. Shoals of fish darted out from gaps in the rock that I hadn't even noticed. Sea urchins clung to the sides in thick black crowds. The water grew colder, and then Shona disappeared. I flicked my tail and sped down. There was a gap in the rock, a huge hole in fact, big enough for a whale to get through. Shona's face appeared from inside. Come on, she said, with a grin. Into the rock? She swam back out and grabbed my hand. We went through it together. It was a dark tunnel, bending and twisting. Eventually, we turned a corner and glimmer of light appeared, growing bigger and bigger until eventually we came out of the tunnel. I stared around me, my jaws wide open. We were in a massive hole in the rock. It must have been the size of a football field. Bigger tunnels and caves led off in all directions around the edges. Above us, below, a giant underwater rabbit warren. Everywhere I looked, people were swimming this way and that, and they all had tails. Merpeople, hundreds of them. There were mermaids with gold chains around slinky long tails, swimming along with little merchildren. One had a merbaby on her back, the tiniest little pink tail sticking out from under its sling. A group of mermaids clustering outside one passageway, talking and laughing together, bags made from fishing nets on their arms. Three old mermen sat outside a different tunnel, their tails faded and wrinkled, their faces full of lines, and their eyes sparkling as they talked and laughed. Welcome to Shiprock, merfolk style, Shona said. Shona better get a move on, don't want to be late. A mermaid with her hair in a tall bun appeared beside us. 5 minutes to the bell, then she flicked her dark green tail and zoomed off ahead. That's Mrs. Tailspin, Shona said. She's my history teacher. We've got her first thing. We followed her along a tube-like channel in the rock. At the other end, where it opened up again, mergirls and boys were swimming together in groups, swishing tails in 100 different shades of blue, green, and purple, and silver, as they milled around, waiting for school to start. A group of girls were playing some kind of skipping game with long pieces of ship's rope. Then noise like a foghorn surrounded us. Everyone suddenly swam into lines, boys on one side, girls on the other. Shona pulled me into a line, into the fish, at the far end. You okay? I nodded, still unable to speak, as we swam single file down yet another tunnel with the rest of our line. Everyone began to take their seats on the smooth, round rocks that were dotted around the circular room. It reminded me of the 360-degree home at the Museum of Science movie theater, where they show films of daredevil flights and crazy downhill skiing, only this wasn't a film. It was real. Shona grabbed an extra rock and pulled it next to hers. A few of the other girls smiled at me. Are you new? One asked. She was little and plump with a thick, dark green tail. It shimmered and sparkled as she spoke. That's my cousin, Shona answered for me quickly. The girl smiled and went to sit on her rock. The walls were covered with collages made from shells and seaweed. Light flickered in through tiny cracks in the ceiling. Then Mrs. Tailspin came in, and we all jumped off our rock to say good morning. Shona put her hand up right away. Is it all right if my cousin sits in with us, please, ma'am? Mrs. Tailspin looked at me up and down. If she's good. Then she clapped her hands. Right, let's get started. Shipwrecks. Today we're going to doing the 19th century. My nose is so itchy. I am so sorry. Shipwrecks. This beats pre-algebra. Mrs. Tailspin passed various objects around the room. These are from the Voyager, she said, as she passed a huge plank of wood to a girl in the front. One of our proudest sinkings. Proudest sinkings? What did that mean? Not a huge amount is known for sure about the wreck of the Voyager, but what we do know is the group of mermaids who called themselves the Siren Sisters were responsible for its great sinking. Through skillful manipulation and careful luring, they managed to distract the entire crew for long enough to bring the great ship down. Shona passed me a couple of interlocked pieces of chain. I examined them and passed them on. Now, the only problem with this sinking was that one or two of the Siren Sisters did. Can anyone think of what that might be? Shona thrust her hand in the air. Yes, Shona? Ma'am, did they fall in love? Now, how did I know you were going to say that? Ever the romantic, aren't you, Shona? A giggle went around the room. Well, as a matter of fact, Shona's right. Mrs. Tailspin went on. Some of the sisters let down the entire operation. Instead of dispersing the crew, they chose to run away with them, never to be seen again. It's not known whether they attempted to return once they discovered the inevitable disappointments of life ashore. I shuffled uncomfortably on my rock. Although, as you know, Mrs. Tailspin continued, Neptune takes a very dim view on those who do. Who's Neptune? I whispered to Shona. The king, she whispered back. And you don't want to get on the wrong side of him, believe me. He's got a terrible temper. He makes thunderstorms and typhoons when he gets in a bad mood. Definitely on par with personality-wise. Definitely on par. Or unleashes sea monsters, but he can calm the roughest seas with a blink. Very powerful, and very rich, too. He lives in a huge palace, all made of coral and gems and gold. Shona, are you saying anything you'd like to share with the class? Mrs. Tailspin was looking our way. Sorry, ma'am, Shona blushed. Mrs. Tailspin shook her head. Now, one rather sorry piece of the Voyager's legacy, she went on, is that it has become somewhat of a symbol for those who chose to follow their siren sisters, doomed paths. Instances are rare, but merfolk and human have been caught together here. I needn't tell you that the punishments have been harsh. Our prison is home to a number of those traitors who have attempted to endanger our population in this way. You have a prison? You have a prison? I whispered. Of course, Shona replied. Really scary from the pictures I've seen. A huge labyrinth of caves out beyond the Great Murmur Reef, near Neptune's palace. I couldn't concentrate for the rest of the morning. When I found out that I wasn't a real mermaid, what if they found out that I really wasn't that I wasn't a real mermaid, and I ended up in that prison? Shona grabbed me as soon as the lesson finished. I've had an amazing thought, she said. Let's go to the shipwreck. Let's find it. What? How? Don't you remember? Mrs. Tailspin told us the exact location. I thought you were daydreaming then. She ran her hands along the side of her tail. Then she did this totally weird thing. She put her hand inside her scales. She felt around for a bit, then pulled something out. It looked like a cross between a compass and a calculator. Her scales closed up as she withdrew her hand. What was that? I screeched. What? Shona looked baffled. I pointed to her tail where her hand had disappeared. My pocket? Pocket? Of course you have pockets. In my denim jacket, yeah, not in my body. Really? Are you sure? I fumbled around the sides of my tail. My hands slipped through a gap. Pockets. I did have them. Shona held up the object she pulled out. We can find the shipwreck with my splishometer. I hesitated. It's true that Mom wasn't expecting me home until 4 o'clock. Should I go? Come on, Emily. It must be such a romantic place. I thought for a second. Okay, let's do it. Let's go this afternoon. Underwater, we made our way slowly out to the sea, with Shona checking her splishometer every few yards. After a while, we came up to look around. A lone line of gulls skimmed the surface. Ahead of us, other seabirds shot into the water like white arrows. We ducked under again. Rays of sun shone in dusty beams under the water. Moments later, Shona's splishometer beeped. We're getting close, she breathed as we dove lower. The sea life was becoming weirder. Something that looked like a peach with tentacles turned slowly around in the water, scanning its surroundings with beady black eyes. Farther down, a see-through jellyfish bounced away from us, a slow-motion space hopper. A rubbery gold crown floated silently upward. Everywhere I looked, fish that could have passed for cartoon aliens bounced and twirled and spun. Shona grabbed my arm. Come on, she said, pointing ahead and swimming away again. Lower and lower, the sea grew darker and darker. As we pressed forward, something came into view. I couldn't make out the shape, but it was surrounded by a hazy golden light. The eerie light grew stronger as we carried on, swimming toward it, and bigger. It was everywhere, all around us. We'd found it, the Voyager. We darted along its length, tracing the row of portholes all the way from the back end to its pointy front, then swam away again to take it all in. Long and sleek, the ship lay on a tilt in the sand, still silent and majestic. This is so amazing. My words gurgled away from me like speech bubbles in a comic strip. It made me laugh, which set more bubbles floating out of my mouth up into the darkness. I couldn't stop staring at the ship. It was like something out of a film, not real life, especially my life. It shone as if it had the sun in it, as though it were made of gold. Made of gold. A shipwreck made of gold. A queasy feeling clutched at my insides. Shona, the masts. Are you okay? Shona asked, taking a look at me. I need to see a mast. Shona pointed up into the darkness again. Come on. Neither of us spoke as we skirted around the hundreds of tiny fish pecking away at the ship's sides and swam up to the deck. Yard after yard of wooden slates rotting. We swam upward, circling one of the masts, wrapping our tails around it like snakes slithering up a tree, my heart hammering loud and fast. What is it? What? What's the mast made of? Shona moved back to examine. Well, it looks like marble, but that's marble? Are you sure? A golden boat with a marble mast. No. I let go of the mast and pushed myself away, scattering a shoal of blue fish as I raced back down to the hole. I had to get away. It wasn't right. It didn't make sense. Emily, what's wrong? Shona was behind me. It's what? What could I say? How could I explain this awful panic inside me? It didn't make sense. I was being ridiculous. It couldn't be. Of course it couldn't. I pushed the thought from my mind. Just a coincidence. It's nothing, I said, laughing off my unease. Come on, let's go inside. Shona slithered along the hole. Fish nibbled at its sides next to her. I shivered as a silky plant brushed against my arm, swaying with the motion of the sea. Found one, she flapped her tail excitedly. I slid her over to join her and found myself in front of a broken porthole. She looked at me for a second, her face bright, reflecting the boat's light. I've never had a real adventure before, she said quietly. Then she disappeared through the empty window. I forced the fear out of my mind. Shona didn't think there was anything to be afraid of. Then I held my arms tight against my side, flicked the end of my tail, and followed Shona through the porthole. We were in a narrow corridor. Bits of wallpaper dripped from the ceiling and watery stalactites, swaying with movement of the sea. Below us, the slanted floor was completely rotten, black and moldy, the random floorboards missing. The walls were lined with plankton. Come on, Shona led the way. Long, thin fish silently skirted the walls and ceiling. Portholes lined the corridor on our left, doors with the paint peeling and cracking all the way down faced them on our right. We tried every one. They're all locked, Shona said, wiggling another rotting doorknob and pushed her weight against another stubborn door. Then she raced ahead to the end of the corridor and disappeared. I followed her around the corner. Right in front of her eyes, a white door seemed to be challenging us. It was bigger than the others, shining and glowing, its round brass handle begging to be turned. A big, fat, beady-eyed fish hovered in front of it like a goalie. Shona tossed her head and she leaned forward to try the handle, her hair flowing out in the water. The fish darted away. The door swung open. Swishing heck, she breathed. I joined her in the doorway. Wow, bubbles danced out of my mouth as I stared. It was the grandest room I'd ever seen, and the biggest, easily as big as the tennis court. At one end, a carpet out of maroon weeds swayed gently with the sea's rhythm. At the other end was a hard white floor. Pearl, Shona said, gliding across the shiny surface. I swam into a corner and circled one of the golden pillars, shining bright light across the room. With every movement, rainbow colors flickered around the walls and ceiling. Bright blue and yellow fish danced in the light. Below, huge round windows, benches with velvet seats, and high wooden backs lined the walls. Large iron tables dotted about in front of them. I picked up a golden goblet from one of the tables. Golden and heavy, it was at the base. It was a long skirt, the cup a deep well, waiting to be filled with magic. Above us, a shoal of fish wreathed and spun along the yellow ceiling. The ceiling! Shona, what's the ceiling made of? Shona swam up to the surface. Amber, by the looks of it. I backed quickly towards the door, flicking my tail as hard as I could. Ceiling of amber, a pavement of pearl. No, it couldn't be. It was impossible. But I couldn't brush away the truth this time. It was the boat from my mom's dream. Thank you for listening to Chapter 5 of The Tale of Emily Windsnap. Thank you for listening, and I'll make out. Peace.